So this is my 2023 wide receiver rankings at the end of the season. Let's get started. I got 10 honorable mentions here. I'm going to have 100 different receivers in this video. I had 75 in the preseason rankings. Now I'm going to put in 100 with 10 honorable mentions here. Jonathan Mingo was number 68. Last time, Isaiah Hodgins, Sky Moore, he was 73 last time. Braxton Berrios, Devontae Parker was 44. Juju was 45. Calvin Austin, Chris Moore, Jalen Hyatt, and Jake Bobo are going to round out my honorable mentions list. So getting started here at number 100, I'm not going to talk too much about all these guys because I got 100 different people to talk about, so it's kind of a lot. But he played 14 games, had about 300 yards and one touchdown. So it wasn't he obviously wasn't doing a whole lot. He was number 72 last time, definitely dropping quite a bit of spots here. Number 99 is going to be Greg Dortch. I did not have him ranked last time. He had about 280 yards and two touchdowns. In his 16 games played, and he has some solid work as well as a punt returner and kick returner. Number 98 is going to be David Bell, who had about 167 yards in his 15 games played. He had three touchdowns in those games, which is better than the guys below him, and about 11 total yards a game. Trey Tucker was also unranked last time. He had 330 yards, in his 16 games played, so about 25 yards a game, which is actually pretty good overall because he also had 77 rushing yards. So about 400 total yards for him is pretty good, and two touchdowns as well. Number 96 is going to be Alex Erickson, was also unranked. He only played in 8 games, but he had 232 yards, which is good for 29 yards a game, which is pretty good for considering the level of receivers I've been talking about so far, and he has one touchdown in those 8 games. Number 95 is going to be Jawan Jennings. He was unranked. He had 265 yards in his 13 games, one touchdown, about 20 yards a game, and of course, his Super Bowl performance was pretty freaking good. He had two touchdowns in that game, one passing and one throwing, and that is definitely a big reason why he finds himself up here in my top 100 ranking. Number 94 is going to be Parker Washington. Has two touchdowns, 132 yards in 9 games, and he has really solid work as a punt returner as well. 94 is going to be Jamal Agnew from the same team. Has 225 yards with one touchdown. About 20 yards a game, and he has some really solid work as a punt returner and kick returner as well. 92 is going to be Cedric Wilson, who's also unranked. He has about 300 yards this season in 15 games, which is almost 20 yards a game, which is pretty good for these guys around here. And three total touchdowns, which is, solid. 91 is going to be Demario Douglas from New England Patriots. He's unranked in the beginning of the season. He actually had 561 yards in his 14 games, which is pretty good. 43 yards per game, some solid work as a punt returner. He did lose a fumble, and it is worth mentioning I'm not including the receiver drops that they in these stats, and that is definitely going to play a big part in a lot of these guys' rankings. Number 90 is going to be Darnell Mooney. I definitely thought it was going to be a lot better this year than he was. I had him ranked at number 43 originally. I thought, he was a wide receiver 1 for them last year and was doing solid. So I thought as a wide receiver 2 with DJ Moore, he could potentially still be a really good receiver. Maybe DJ Moore could help him actually, maybe gain some more looks because their best corners and stuff won't be on Darnell Mooney. But he only ended up getting 400 yards in 15 games and only one total touchdown. So definitely not a good season compared to last year. Number 89 is going to be Julio Jones. He only played in 11 games, only had 74 total yards, but he had three touchdowns, in his very limited action. So, some good solid work for the Eagles when they ended up picking him up. I'm not exactly sure if he's going to be on a team at all next season, but at least he got a couple more touchdowns to go towards his career stats. Number 88 is going to be Rashad Bateman. I had him at number 63 before, so he definitely dropped a few spots here. Had about 367 yards in 16 games. 24 yards a game is okay, I guess. Only one total touchdown is not great. Definitely thought he would be better this year, but obviously did not work out that way. Number 87 is going to be Robert Woods. He definitely did better than I thought he would. I had him unranked at the beginning of the year. He had 426 yards, about 30 yards a game in his 14 games, which is solid. Only one touchdown, though. A little bit underwhelming, but definitely better than I thought it was going to be. I did not expect him to have much of a role in this offense, and he had a pretty decent role, getting 30 yards a game. Next up is going to be Marquez Valdes-Scantling from Kansas City Chiefs. I had him at number 67 because really I thought the Chiefs receivers were going to do more than what they did this year for the most part because, I figured they had to throw the ball to somebody, but obviously, that really did not work out a lot as expected. He had about 20 yards per game, 315 total yards in 16 games, which is pretty solid. 15 yards per reception is really good. And, you know, had some solid work as a punt returner and then definitely played some pretty solid football in the postseason, which is a lot of why he's going to actually find himself up here at number 86. If it was not for his playoff performances and some really important catches in those games, he definitely would not be on this list. Number 85 is going to be Khalif Raymond for Detroit Lions. I did not expect him to do much of anything this year. He had over 550 total yards, which is about 33 yards a game, which is pretty solid. And he was a solid punt returner as well and had one total touchdown. Quentin Johnson for the Chargers wasn't bad. I thought it was going to be better this season than he was. I had him at number 53, but I felt like he should definitely be better than he was this season. But it wasn't a horrible rookie season. Only 431 yards is not good, but I definitely think this guy could still be a solid receiver next season, and he'll probably take on a bigger role next year with potentially Mike Williams not being on the team. I know Mike Williams was injured basically most of this season, but there's definitely a possibility that either Mike Williams or Keenan Allen could be off the team this season because of their cap hits and stuff. They could be cut candidates. So then hopefully Quentin Johnson can take a big leap next year. Number 83 is going to be Trey Palmer from the Bucks. He did pretty solid. Almost 400, hit over 400 total yards in 3 touchdowns in 17 games played. It's pretty solid there. Next up is going to be Michael Gallup. I had him at number 50. I thought he was going to be better than he was. He wasn't horrible. 420 yards and 2 touchdowns in 17 games isn't too crazy, but he also did have a 3 touchdown game in that playoff game. A lot of those were empty stats because they were down by so much, and then he just ended up getting a couple of garbage touchdowns. But he still had 3 touchdowns in that playoff game, which definitely helps him move up a few spots here. 81 is going to be Alec Pierce. I thought he was going to be better than he was as well. At about number 59, I figured he'd be a solid wide receiver 2 for the Colts, but then obviously Josh Downs, very much outperformed Alec Pierce, which is fine. He had over 500 yards and a couple of touchdowns still, which isn't bad for a wide receiver 3. Next up is going to be Elijah Moore at number 80. I had him at 56. Really, he played probably about how I thought he would. Maybe I thought he would get a couple more touchdowns than only 2. 640 yards is pretty good for him here. 38 yards a game. He also did have 2 fumbles lost, though. That definitely hurts him a little bit. If he would have, been able to get one more touchdown and cut down on both of those fumbles, he probably would have been a lot closer to number 56 on this list. Number 79 is going to be Rondo Moore. I had him unranked. Didn't know if much receivers on the Cardinals were going to do much of anything, but he did pretty solid. 500 total yards, 2 touchdowns. Pretty solid for a wide receiver 3 option. I think he was their wide receiver 2 technically, but definitely some wide receiver 3 type of production from him. Number 78 is going to be Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. He was unranked at the beginning of the year. Didn't really think he was going to get a lot of work in, but he actually played pretty solid. 370 yards and 3 touchdowns in 14 games. Is definitely better than I thought it was going to be, and he had some solid punt return action as well. Number 75 is going to be 77. Sorry, it's going to be KaVontae Turpin. I did not have him ranked at the beginning of the season. He did not have a whole bunch of yards this season, about 237 total yards with 4 touchdowns. It's pretty solid. And he's also a really good punt and kick returner. That's going to be a lot of why he gets up all the way up here is because of his punt and kick return abilities. Number 76 is going to be Justin Watson from the Chiefs. He had 460 yards this year, which is pretty good for him. Definitely not what I expected out of him. With 3 touchdowns, he was one of the Chiefs' more reliable targets. Definitely more reliable than Sky Moore, MVS, and Kadarius Toney, which obviously I did not predict at the beginning of the year. No, not a lot of people did, but he played really solid for the Chiefs, and he was a solid punt returner option for them as well. Number 75 is going to be Michael Thomas. He only played in 10 games, injury prone. Definitely not anywhere close to prime Michael Thomas. I had him at number 29 coming into the season. I thought he was going to have a really good year. That's Derek Carr at quarterback. Definitely an upgrade over who he had last year. So I thought he could be a solid option, but he had injury issues and just simply wasn't as good as he was previous years. But 450 yards isn't bad in 10 games. He only had 1 touchdown, though, is a little bit the downside there. Number 74 is going to be Bill Melton. Did not know who this guy was before this season, but he played pretty solid. Only played in 5 total games, but he had 218 yards a game. He carved out a role more towards the end of the season, I believe. Had almost 50 yards per game in his very limited sample size. So I thought he was actually doing a really solid in his very limited time for the Packers. So that's why I'm going to put him right here at number 74. Number 73 is going to be Brandon Johnson from the Broncos. He was pretty solid. He played 13 games, had nearly 300 yards and 4 touchdowns in 13 games. Pretty good for him. Number 72 is going to be Jameson Williams. I had him at 54. I thought it was going to be a little bit better than he was. I probably said he would have get around like 600 total yards, but he only played in 12 games because he was suspended for the first 6 games, I believe, for the gambling stuff or whatever. So he missed quite a bit of games, but he still had almost 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is pretty solid for him. Over 31 yards a game, which is all right, and nearly 15 yards per reception, which is actually really good. Number 71 is going to be Jerry Jeudy. I had him at number 25. This guy definitely was not good this year compared to previous years. I predicted, when you go from um, Russell Wilson, who was not, like the best quarterback last year. Russell Wilson definitely improved this year, and he got a better head coach. So I figured Jerry Jeudy could also like improve or at least do much of the same that he did last year, but he definitely regressed quite a bit. 758 yards in 16 games isn't horrible, but only 2 touchdowns is not, definitely not very good. Next up is going to be A.T. Perry from the Saints. He only played in 10 games, only had 250 yards, but he had 4 touchdowns in those 10 games. That was really solid. So yeah. Next up is going to be Wan'Dale Robinson from the Giants. He was actually one of the better receivers this season. Definitely did not have him, ranked at the beginning of the year. He had over 600 total yards. Only 2 touchdowns though is not very great, but a lot of the Giants quarterbacks were not throwing for a whole bunch of touchdowns. 600 yards is pretty solid from him. Over 40 yards a game. Number 68 is going to be Demarcus Robinson. Did not think this guy was going to get as much of reps that he did, but he played pretty solid. Almost 400 yards this season with 4 touchdowns in the 16 games that he did play. And 14 yards per reception, which was really good for him. Number 67 is going to be Tutu Atwell on the same team, right? He outperformed him a little bit. He had over 500 yards with 3 touchdowns in his 16 games, nearly 40 receptions as well. I definitely think he did a little bit better than Demarcus Robinson. Number 66 is going to be Marvin Mims from the Broncos. He was really solid, about 400 yards with only one receiving touchdown and 2 lost fumbles. But he had 17 yards per reception, which is a lot. And it was a really good punt and kick returner, making the Pro Bowl for that, and had 1 touchdown from that as well. Number 65 is going to be Nelson Agholor, who I thought was really solid this season compared to, Nelson Agholor in the past. Definitely did not have him coming into the season ranked. He had almost 400 yards with 4 touchdowns, which definitely, simply a lot better than I thought he was. And I thought he played pretty good in the playoffs as well, which is also boosting him up here. Next up is going to be KJ Osborne from the Giants. He played pretty solid, 540 yards in 16 games with 3 total touchdowns and almost 50 receptions as well. Definitely a lot better than I thought he was going to be doing this season. I had him at 66. He came up at 64, so I was actually pretty close on the rankings there. Number 63 is Tyler Boyd. I had him at 36. He definitely underperformed there a little bit, but still nearly 700 yards. Just only 2 touchdowns, which I thought he would probably get more than that. But still very solid wide receiver 3 option in the league. Number 62 is Josh Downs, who definitely was unranked at the beginning of the season. Not expecting him to be as good as he was. 771 yards is really good for wide receiver 2. 68 receptions, only 2 touchdowns is not great, but he was also a really good punt returner as well for the Colts. Number 61 is going to be Jahan Dotson. I had him at 46. He came down a little bit to 61. 518 yards in 17 games is definitely less than I thought he was going to do. And 4 total touchdowns was not great, but definitely was still a very solid wide receiver 3 option for this Commanders team. Number 60 is going to be OBJ. I had him at 39. Thought he would do more than he did. Ravens had so many different receivers that all did pretty decent and stuff. So OBJ, suffered a little bit because of that. He had 565 yards in 14 games, which is pretty solid. 3 touchdowns to 1 fumble. He played pretty solid, like good wide receiver, 2 to 3 numbers. Definitely not anything special, but still a very reliable option, in my opinion. Number 59 is Zay Jones. He only played in 9 games this year, but he had 320 yards and 2 touchdowns, 36 yards per game. I thought it was pretty solid there for the most part. Number 58 is going to be Khalil Shakir from the Buffalo Bills. He did a lot better than I thought he would. He had 621 yards and 2 touchdowns. I did not expect him to get 600 plus yards, and he was also a really solid punt returner and kick returner as well, and averaged nearly 16 yards per reception. Number 57 is going to be Josh Reynolds from the Lions. He did a lot better than I thought he would too. I had him unranked coming in. He had over 600 yards with 5 touchdowns. He did have 1 fumble, but that's okay. He had pretty good other numbers, and he was a really solid punt returner for the Lions at times as well. Number 56 is going to be Dontavion Wicks from the Green Bay Packers. Definitely did not think this guy was going to do much of anything this season. Coming into the year, I felt like the Packers had one of the worst receiving corps in the league, because all these guys are first or second year guys that have hardly any experience before this year. But they also had a whole bunch of guys this year that just were actually really solid options for them. Dontavion Wicks had nearly 600 yards and 4 touchdowns, in 15 games, which was really solid. Number 55 is going to be Jackson Smith and Jigba, JSN from Seattle Seahawks. He was a wide receiver 3. I had him at 42 coming in. Getting a little bit worse to 55 is, still pretty solid. 630 yards, 63 receptions, and 4 touchdowns in 17 games. This is very solid wide receiver 3 numbers. Nothing you can be really too upset at. Number 54 is going to be Josh Palmer from the Chargers. He did really good in his 10 games played. He had 581 yards, so 58 yards per game in his 10 games is really good, and 2 touchdowns. He did have 1 fumble, which definitely drops him a little bit, but definitely, really solid option, and very much outperformed Quentin Johnston to basically be the wide receiver 2 for this team because Mike Williams was injured. Number 53 is going to be Michael Wilson from the Cardinals. Did not have this guy ranked. I did not know much about this dude coming into the season. He had 565 yards and 3 touchdowns in 13 games, which is really solid, over 43 yards per game. Number 52 is going to be DJ Chark. I had him coming in at 49. He only dropped 3 spots here, so I was pretty close on that. He had 525 yards and 5 touchdowns in 15 games, so really solid numbers for him as a wide receiver 2, I believe, for the Panthers. Number 51, he was number 37. He's going to be Drake London. He was still a really solid receiver, I feel like, but did not have a lot of touchdowns this season. Only 2 touchdowns. He had 900 yards, 69 receptions. Very solid numbers, but you would like this guy to have, more productive numbers than that. So hopefully next year they get a better quarterback, and they obviously have a better offensive or head coach and coordinators and stuff better than Arthur Smith to get their ball to your playmakers. Number 50 is going to be Noah Brown from the Texans. Very much surprised from this dude. He had 565 yards this season. With 2 touchdowns, was really, really good in only 10 games. So 56 yards per game and 17 yards per reception. Those are some really, really good numbers for Noah Brown. Number 49 is going to be Christian Kirk. I had him coming in at 35, so definitely drops a couple spots here. But he wasn't that bad. 783 yards is good. 3 touchdowns is good. He did have 2 fumbles though, which is not great. He did all that in 12 games though, so 66 yards per game. Some really, really good numbers. He was doing really good until he got injured for a few games, but definitely a very solid wide receiver 2 option for this team. Number 48 is going to be Darius Slayton. He was number 69. Definitely outperformed what I figured he would do. 770 yards and 4 touchdowns on this Giants team with your quarterback carousel that you had this year is definitely not easy. But this is some really solid numbers in my opinion, especially in only 13 games. So very proud of his performances this season and very much surprised. Number 47 is going to be Curtis Samuel. I had him at 61. So basically, he had about 650 yards and 4 touchdowns. He basically did as good as I thought Jahan Dotson was going to do, and Jahan Dotson did as good as I thought Curtis Samuel was going to do. I figured Dotson would be the 2 and Samuel would be the 3, but Samuel definitely played more like the wide receiver 2 this year than Jahan Dotson. Number 46 is going to be Marquise Brown. I thought he was really solid this season for Arizona Cardinals. Uh, he was at 52 last year, so he's been up a couple spots. 600 total yards with 4 touchdowns is really solid. 51 receptions is pretty good in 14 games. Good for over 42 yards per game, which is really solid for them. Next up is going to be Romeo Doubs. He was really good. I did not expect this guy to be much of anything. Like I already talked about the Packers receivers, basically all of them um, surprising me quite a bit here. He had almost 700 total yards with 8 touchdowns, which is definitely a lot more than I thought he was going to do with this season. Really good numbers from him. Number 44 is going to be Christian Watson. I had him coming in at 32. I thought he would definitely be the best Packers receiver this season because he's the only one that actually did much of anything last year, but not really the case. He did not have the best season. He had 422 yards in 9 games, 5 touchdowns. Like really solid numbers there for the games. He would be averaging close to like eight to 900 yards and almost 10 touchdowns if he played a full season, which is very solid numbers. But definitely still was not the best receiver on this Packers team. Number 43 is going to be Adam Thielen. Did not expect him to have 100 receptions and 1,000 yards on this Carolina Panthers team, but he definitely outperformed my expectations. Only 4 touchdowns is not great as a wide receiver one for your team, but Bryce Young had like 13 touchdown passes all year or something very small number or something. So like it's understandable. Number 42 is going to be Garrett Wilson. Really upset about this guy. He was one of my best, like my most liked receivers coming into this year. I thought he was going to be absolutely amazing. Obviously, that was, assuming he had Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball rather than Tim Boyle, Zach Wilson, and Trevor Siemian. So that definitely makes a difference. He had 95 receptions for 1,042 yards, with only 3 touchdowns with 2 lost fumbles. Definitely not good stats there. I would assume if this guy had Aaron Rodgers all season, he'd probably have closer to like 6 to 7 touchdowns and like 12 to 1,300 yards. Would definitely be higher on this list. Next up is going to be Chris Godwin at 41. I had him at 33. Dropped a couple spots here. Wasn't too bad. He had over 1,000 yards with 3 total touchdowns, so pretty solid numbers still. Probably expected him to get more than only 3 touchdowns though, but still a really solid wide receiver 2 season for him. Number 40 is going to be Tyler Lockett. He had almost 900 yards with 5 touchdowns in 17 games played. I had him at 23. I definitely thought he was going to be, better than he was. I thought he would probably get over 1,000 yards for sure, but he was about 100 yards off from that. Still a really solid wide receiver 2 year for him as well. Number 39 is going to be Gabe Davis for the Buffalo Bills. Had him at 34. Drops a couple spots here, not too much. About 750 yards with 7 touchdowns is really solid for him. So yeah, pretty good season for Gabe Davis. Number 38 is going to be Terry McLaurin. Definitely dropped a lot of spots here too. He only had 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. 1,000 yards is good. I thought he would get more than 4 touchdowns, probably like somewhere like 6 to 7, and probably somewhere around 1,200 yards is where I would have expected him to be around. I thought Sam Howell was going to play better than he was. I mean, he was definitely playing better during the first half of the season and then started sucking toward the later half, so maybe that affects Terry McLaurin quite a bit. But he was still a really solid receiver, just definitely not, near a top 10 receiver this season. Number 37 is going to be Kendrick Bourne. He only played in 8 games, but I definitely feel like he was one of the best Patriots receivers this season. They did not have a lot of good receivers on their team at all, but he had 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in only 8 games played. So, if we do the math, that's about 800 yards and 8 touchdowns for a full season, which is definitely some very solid numbers. Number 36 is going to be George Pickens. I had him at 19. He's going to drop quite a bit of spots here. Had about 1,100 yards with 5 touchdowns, 18 yards per reception, which is really good. I believe that led the league in yards per reception, which is, really good. He's had a really good season. I feel like just not quite the season I thought he would. I probably expected him to get more than 5 touchdowns, but, Kenny Pickett did not throw hardly any touchdowns all season, so that's definitely a big part of it. Number 35 is going to be Michael Pittman. He had 109 receptions and 1,152 yards. Definitely better than I thought he was going to do there. He only had 4 touchdowns though, which thought he'd probably get a little bit more than that, but like it's not too bad. 72 yards per game is pretty good. Number 34 is going to be Rashee Rice. I did not expect this guy to be the best receiver for the Chiefs this season. We'll figure out who I thought their best receiver was going to be later. Definitely, definitely embarrassing decisions for me, or embarrassing predictions for me for the Chiefs wide receiver room. But Rashee Rice is really good at having over 900 yards with 7 touchdowns, and he was really good in the playoffs for the Chiefs as well. Number 33 is going to be Deontay Johnson. I definitely thought George Pickens would be the best receiver on this team. They're both kind of close. He had 5 touchdowns and 700 yards in his 13 games played, so really solid numbers for Deontay Johnson. Number 32 is going to be Rashid Shaheed. Did not have this guy ranked this season. No, he was really good on a lot of different categories here. He had over 700 yards with 5 touchdowns. He also was a really good punt returner and kick returner. Made the Pro Bowl because of that, and had a touchdown there as well. So had over 50 yards per game, which is really good for him. Next up is going to be Jalen Waddle. I had him coming in at number 8. I thought him and Tyreek Hill were both top 10 receivers. They were both really, really good last year. Jalen Waddle definitely took a little bit of a step back. He only had 4 total touchdowns this year. He still had 1,000 yards in 14 games, which is really good. But took a little bit of a hit on his touchdowns, only catching 4 touchdowns. But still a really good receiver, and definitely one of the top wide receiver twos in the league. Number 30 is going to be Cooper Kupp. I had him at number 4. He definitely took a massive step back this season. Puka Nacua definitely outperformed Cooper Kupp. He was still pretty solid in his games that he did play. He was also injured quite a bit, so it definitely hurts him a little bit, but still had 737 yards and 5 touchdowns in only 12 games played. Definitely some really solid numbers, and definitely one of the best wide receiver twos in the league. Number 29 is going to be Courtland Sutton. I've had him at 27, so he was right around the same area. He had 772 yards with 10 touchdowns in 16 games. So definitely one of the highest receiving touchdowns out of any player this season. But he also had 3 lost fumbles, which definitely going to hurt him quite a few spots on this ranking. But it's still a really good season for Courtland Sutton. Number 28 is going to be T. Higgins. He only played in 12 games. I had him coming in at number 12 this season. Definitely was a lot worse than that, but still a really solid receiver. 656 yards and 5 touchdowns in 12 games is some really good numbers. Still definitely one of the better wide receiver twos in the league. Number 27 is going to be Brandin Cooks. I thought he was going to be, around the same type of player as Michael Gallup was, but he was definitely a lot better. I had him coming in at number 48. He had over 657 yards, almost 700 total yards with 8 total touchdowns in only 15 games, which is some really, really good numbers for Brandin Cooks. Number 26, I had Chris Olave. He had 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns. I had him coming in at number 28, so I was right around the same area for him. 70 yards per game is really solid, and 5 touchdowns, like I said, still really good season for Chris Olave. Number 25 is going to be Amari Cooper. I had him coming in at number 18. Dropped a few spots here. Some people will probably think this is a little bit low, but honestly, I just think there's a lot of great wide receiver play this year because I expected this guy to be a lot higher on my personal rankings. But coming in here, he had 1,250 yards, which is really good. He had 83 yards per game in his 15 games. He only had 5 touchdowns, though, in 15 games. You'd probably like to see him get a little bit more than that. He also definitely had some quarterback issues, having to play with PJ Walker and Dorian Thompson-Robinson for a few games definitely does not help anything. But he was really good with Joe Flacco and Deshaun Watson. Number 24 is going to be Calvin Ridley. I had him coming in at number 20. Definitely was a little bit worse than I thought he was going to be, but still had 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. So you can't be too upset about his performances this season. Number 23 is going to be DeAndre Hopkins. Had him coming in at 15. It was a little worse than I thought he would be, but still over 1,000 yards with 7 touchdowns is really, really good for DeAndre Hopkins. Still definitely one of the better receivers in the league, just definitely not near prime DeAndre Hopkins numbers. Number 22 is going to be Zay Flowers. I had him coming in at number 62 this season. Definitely outperformed all of my expectations. He had over 900 yards with 6 total touchdowns in 16 games, and he was really solid in his couple of playoff games that he played as well. Definitely surprised me with his performance this season. Number 21, I had Jaden Reed. Very much surprised me. Had him coming in unranked. Like I already said about the Packers receivers, did not know much about any of them other than Christian Watson coming into the season. He had over 900 total yards with 10 total touchdowns in 16 games. Definitely one of the best receivers in the league this season. Number 20 is going to be Jakobi Meyers. Him as well. I had him coming in at number 51. I figured Devontae Parker and Juju Smith-Schuster. Wait, shoot, never mind, never mind. The Patriots picture is confusing me. He was on the Raiders this season. I'm sorry, the Patriots picture is confusing me, but he was really good for the Raiders this season. Um, I was thinking Hunter Renfrow is probably going to be close to him or better than him this season, but he had over 800 yards with 10 total touchdowns this season and a passing touchdown, so actually 11 total touchdowns in 16 games for Jacoby Myers. Definitely a lot better than I thought he was going to be. Definitely a lot closer a level to Devontae Adams than I thought he was going to be. Number 19 is going to be Devontae Smith. Had 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns in 16 games. Really solid season. Definitely one of the best wide receiver twos in the league. Number 18 is going to be Devontae Adams. So I only have him and Jacoby Myers separated by one player. Um, Definitely surprised me. But if you look at the stats here, Adams had 8 touchdowns. Myers had 11. Myers had like 300 less yards than Devontae Adams, but that's really the only difference here. So they really weren't that far off this season. Devontae Adams, I still feel like is definitely a better talent. I had him coming in at number 2 this season because I figured Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't going to suck this year. I thought Jimmy Garoppolo was going to probably be close to the same type of player that Derek Carr was for them last year, but that was not the case. And with poor quarterback play, Devontae Adams definitely suffered a little bit, but he still had 1,100 yards with 8 touchdowns, so you can't really be too upset about that. Number 17 is going to be Jordan Addison. Had him coming in at number 47. I definitely did predict this guy to be the best rookie wide receiver. A lot of people did not have this guy even being better than like Quentin Johnston or Zay Flowers. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. He still wasn't the best rookie wide receiver because obviously, we'll get to him when we get there, but he was definitely the best first round wide receiver, and I predicted that. So I feel good about that. He had over 900 yards with 10 touchdowns in 17 games, which is definitely some really, really good numbers for a rookie wide receiver. Number 16 is going to be Stephon Diggs. Had him coming in at number 5. Definitely underperformed a little bit, but still a really solid receiver. Almost 1,200 yards with 8 touchdowns. Did have one fumble lost, but still a really, really good receiver this year, averaging nearly 70 yards per game. Number 15 is going to be DK Metcalf. He was, really good this year as well. 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, about 70 yards per game, and 17 yards per reception. One of the best receivers in the league as well. So number 14 is going to be A.J. Brown. Definitely did not think this guy was going to be this slow. I figured he'd be a top 10 to even a top 5 potentially when I was making this video, but 14 is the place where he's going to fall. He had 7 touchdowns, nearly 1,500 yards. He did have 2 lost fumbles, though. Definitely does not help his case. 85 yards per game is really good, though. I definitely has a case to be a lot higher. With all like these top 15 to top 20 guys, all of them I feel like have a case to be top 10 receivers. So, don't take these rankings to heart. Just think that all of these guys are like really, really good players, and it's really hard to rank some of this top end wide receiver talent. Number 13 is going to be Brandon Ayuk. He had 1,300 yards with 7 touchdowns in 16 games, 84 yards per game. He was really good, and he was really good in the playoffs for the Niners as well. Definitely one of the best wide receivers in the league. Him and Deebo Samuel, killer wide receiver combination there. I currently have Brandon Ayuk ranked a little bit lower, so I think he's still the wide receiver 2 technically, kind of, but he definitely gets more receiving work than Deebo, I think. Deebo just gets a lot more rushing work and stuff. So I don't really know if you want to call the wide receiver 1 or 2 there, but either way, whichever one of them is a wide receiver 2 is definitely the best wide receiver 2 in the league. Number 12 is going to be Jamar Chase. Had him coming in at number 6. Number 12 is definitely feels low for him, but he had only had like 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns, which is still really, really good numbers, but like just does not compare to the top end of wide receiver talent here. Maybe having Jake Browning as opposed to Joe Burrow for half the season definitely affects that a little bit. Number 11 is going to be Tank Dell. Had him coming in unranked. Did not have this guy on my radar that much. He had over 750 yards and 7 touchdowns in only 11 games. This guy was absolutely amazing in his 11 games that he played. Would definitely have liked to see him play a full season because I feel like he definitely could have got to like 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns. This would have been absolutely insane for a guy that I did not think highly of or really think about at all coming into the year. Number 10 is going to be Puka Nacua. Definitely the best rookie wide receiver this season. over 1,500 total yards with 6 touchdowns, 92 yards per game. Absolutely amazing this season. Obviously, I had him coming in unranked. Nobody really knew who this guy was coming into the league, and he definitely, um, you know, showed everybody that he is one of the best receivers in the league. Number 9 is going to be Nico Collins. So I think the Texans got two guys coming up here, being some of the best receivers in the league. I had him coming in at number 60. Jumps all the way up to number 9. He had over 1,300 total yards with 8 touchdowns in only 15 games, had 87 yards per game. So the Texans also have a very, very killer two wide receiver combination with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. I would still probably take the Niners combination over them, but I think like those are definitely some very good wide receiver duos. Number 8 is going to be DJ Moore. Had him coming in at 31. I did not really know how much a difference was going to make. And it got like Justin Fields as your quarterback as opposed to, your the Panthers quarterback history. But he had over almost 1,400 yards with 9 touchdowns and 1 fumble. Definitely one of the best seasons of his career, if not the best, and definitely showed to be a top 10 receiver in the league this season. Number 7 is going to be Deebo Samuel. So, like I said, Brandon Ayuk, I think, had more receiving work than him, but he had 900 receiving yards with 7 touchdowns there, and then another 200 rushing yards with 5 rushing touchdowns. So, over 1,100 total yards with 12 total touchdowns for Deebo Samuel. Definitely one of the best, overall players in the entire league. Definitely, one of the best receivers as well, coming in here at number 7. Number 6 is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. I had him coming in at 14. I expected him to be one of the best receivers. I did not expect him to be quite as good as he is, with over 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns, nearly 100 yards a game, had 96 yards per game. Definitely, definitely deserving of a top 10 receiver in the NFL. Number 5 is going to be Keenan Allen. He was amazing this year. He only played 13 games, but I had him coming in at number 26. He's going to jump all the way up to number 5. Definitely might make a difference when he lost Mike Williams. He had to take on a bigger role and stuff, but he had over 1,200 yards with 7 touchdowns and 108 receptions in only 13 games. I thought he was definitely one of the best receivers in the league this year. Number 4 is going to be Mike Evans. I thought he was really good this year with Baker Mayfield. Had him coming in at number 22. I also thought Baker Mayfield was not going to be quite as good as he was this season, obviously. So that definitely plays a factor into me underrating Mike Evans as well. He had over 1,200 yards with 13 touchdowns. I believe 13 touchdowns was tied with CeeDee Lamb, I think, for the most receiving touchdowns in the league this year. So that's really good to see from Mike Evans. He was definitely one of the best receivers in the league. Number 3 is going to be Justin Jefferson. Had him coming in at number 1. Obviously had injury issues. The fact that he still got to 1,000 yards in only 10 games is kind of crazy. He only had like 5 touchdowns to 1 fumble. That's not a great thing there, but he's still definitely one of the best receivers in the league without a doubt. 106 yards per game is absolutely wild. Number 2 is going to be CeeDee Lamb. Have him coming in at number 11. He definitely had a top 2 season in the league. I feel like him and Tyreek Hill obviously are the 1 or 2 receivers in the league based on this season alone. He had over 1,800 total yards with 14 total touchdowns and 2 fumbles, 109 yards per game, 135 receptions, an absolutely elite wide receiver season, without a doubt, top 2 receiver in the league this year. And then number 1 is going to be Tyreek Hill. He had over 1,800 total yards with 13 total touchdowns to 1 fumble. 113 yards per game was absolutely ridiculous. I felt like he was definitely going to break the receiving yards record until he got some minor injuries towards the end of the season, where he had to miss like half a game or something, and then I think he missed 1 full game in there too. So definitely hurt him there a little bit, but he was obviously the best receiver in the league this season. I don't really think that's too debatable. So let's go to the receivers that I had listed in the first preseason video compared to that did not make the video this time. I had Allen Robinson at 75. I had Jalen Hyde at 74. John Mechie at 71. Hunter Renfrow at 65. Paris Campbell at 64. Sterling Shepard at 58. Chase Claypool at 57. Treylon Burks at 41. Mecole Hardman at 70. And Kadarius Toney at 38. So all of those guys just simply were not good enough to make the video this time. I thought Kadarius Toney was going to be great this year. Like a really good option for the Chiefs. Obviously, that did not happen. So definitely whiffed big time on that. And then Mike Williams, I also had at number 21, but obviously he was injured the whole season, so you're not gonna hold that against him. But I had like 10 players in here or something. Let me count them real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, I had 10 players in here from the original list that aren't even gonna end up making this video. So definitely missed a lot of guys here. But yeah, that is going to be the video. Thank you for watching. Um, I believe I should have a tight end video coming out tomorrow, so make sure to check up on that and then continue to support the channel with my NBA videos and other NFL videos that I continue to make.